With the sport of boxing always being in question about the sport is dying, the sport is struggling to keep people interested in the sport, and how the sport is always lagging behind other sports. When it comes to stuff like this, Josh Taylor versus Jack Caterall, when it comes to stuff like this, boxing would actually be more entertaining if they would suspend the corruption. What do I mean by that? Think of how entertaining boxing could be if these guys didn't interfere. That means Castaño would have beat Charlo. That means Caterall would have beat Josh Taylor. That means Oscar Valdez would have lost his last fight. That also means that no controversial decisions. That means people like Triple G would have won his fight. And just off those things alone, basically if they step out of the picture and let the fight take its course and basically predict what happens next in the sport would be more entertaining if there was no corruption. Because one of the main things about this sport that turns people off is exactly what happened to Caterall. That's exactly what turns people off from the sport. And another thing is, somebody could have won big that night. Somebody picked Jack Caterall to beat Josh Taylor. And you know what? They could have won big. And they would have won big if it wasn't for the corruption. So now, when you place your bets, should you take politics, home cooking, and home advantage and all that other stuff? Should you take that into consideration when you placing your bets? You shouldn't have to, but you would be wise to do so. Because although you can be in the right frame of boxing mind, you might not be in the right frame politic wise. And this is the thing that ruined the sport. This is why I say I don't take this sport seriously no more. I actually lost love for it. I love the craft of boxing. The sport of boxing, I care nothing for. But the craft of the whole thing, it could be one of the most beautiful sports in the world if you could just weave out the corruption. But that'll never happen. And why does stuff like this happen? Stuff like this happens simply because the boxing world knows that they can hide behind a fan base. See, regardless if Josh Taylor won or not, there's some people who want Josh Taylor to be Josh Taylor for the sake of it's Josh Taylor. They don't care if he really won that fight or really lost that fight. They just want to see Josh Taylor as an undisputed champion, and that's it. Okay? Well, the boxing world hides behind that fan base because if the fan base doesn't call it out, that creates a shield for corruption, which is why stuff like this in boxing is only going to get worse. Because it's a fan base that you can hide behind. It's people that you can hide behind. It's people who just want to adore another man. And these boxers and their promoters, they use that to avoid certain fights and avoid certain things. I don't know one person who thought Josh Taylor won that fight, which is rare in boxing, that we can all agree on something. But I don't know one person who thought Josh Taylor won that fight. You know? Which brings me up to another point, is that we have to accept the fact that the days of fighting the best are gone and they're never coming back. I'm convinced now, because it's not lucrative. It's not what the promoters want. And we are just sitting in a different era now. We're just totally in a different era. That days of the best fighting the best and wanting to fight the best sheerly because they are the best, we will never see those days again. I had hopes. Now I'm almost convinced. Because if there are some in boxing who are like that, they are the few and in between. They are the rare breeds, and it's only a handful of them. What is it? Maybe 3 or 4 boxers in boxing who really will fight anybody at any given time, who has a substantial name. So the rest of the game is not going to play along with them. So therefore, their oddballs, they stick out. They'll have problems. All right. People like Demetrius Andrade will always have problems. Boots Ennis will have the same problem that Demetrius Andrade and Terrence Crawford will have. When you're good, you're feared, and you don't get fights unless you have money behind your name. Period. You gotta offer them enough money to be able to give up a loss. You know, and most people don't want to do that, and their handlers don't want to do that. So the days of the best fighting the best, you can forget about it. That's not what this game is set up to be anymore. And that's just the way it is. We just have to, I've been accepted that about this sport. And this is why you got what you got Saturday night. And you will get more of it. And you will keep getting even more of it until the day comes when boxing fans and people who support this sport and give up their hard money put their foot down and say, no, fan or no fan, that man lost that fight. This is wrong. We're looking at the wrong winner. And how could you ever find out who the best is if the best is being pushed to the top of the list and it is choreographed, it is engineered? You'll never really see the best fight the best because the best didn't win the fight due to politics. And that's just the fucked up thing about the sport. The other thing I want to talk about is people questioning Josh Taylor's skill set now. This is something that I do not believe in. Everybody and anybody, we can all have a bad day and an off day. I don't expect every fight to look like your career-defining win or your career-defining fight. You're going to be off some days. Sometimes your camps are not going to be the best. Sometimes you're going to be lackadaisical. Sometimes people don't get up for opponents with no names. Therefore, they take it easy in camp. I don't think just because he lost the fight that he's no longer a pound-for-pound fighter or he's no longer a good fighter or something like that. I think we're too quick to sign people up to greatness and write them off as losers the second they don't do something that we think they should have done. These people are human. They're going to have an off night. Josh Taylor is still a pound-for-pound fighter. Period. Now, what would speak to me with Josh Taylor, this is why I like throwback fighters, is when you have a win like this, the natural competitiveness in you, the Roy Jones in you, would say run that back. This is why you got to like people like Floyd. Because if Floyd ever had a controversial win, or you thought he didn't win a fight, or you thought it was close, what did Floyd do every time consistently? He ran the fight back. Any fight you thought he lost, any fight you thought was close, he ran the fight back and proved that it was no mistake. I think that is something that Josh Taylor should do. But Josh Taylor has already said no rematch. And he's moving on up. That's something that I didn't expect from Josh Taylor. But then again, I'm expecting old school mentality. This is why I say we got to let that shit go. And there's more of this shit to come. This is why when you look at up-and-coming fights like Shakur Stevenson versus Oscar Valdez, due to the fact that Oscar Valdez was allowed to fight while taking PEDs and he robbed my man. Sure, on paper, as boxing fans, we all know Shakur Stevenson all day. But if that's a 12-round fight, don't be surprised if he loses it. This is boxing. You want it to change? You're going to have to demand something different. And the main way you do that is to get rid of your fanboy draws. If we treat all fighters the same, hold them all to the same standard, nobody can get away with nothing. And we'll find out who the best is. But this sport is no longer made to find out who the best is. This is literally just an entertainment sport. Nothing more, nothing less, and it's barely even competitive anymore. So don't be shocked, don't be surprised, because unfortunately, this will not be the last time. And we all have a helping hand in this kind of shit going on in boxing. And until we can all come together as a collective and say, look, I want to see the best fight the best, no shortcuts, no nothing, no fanboy, no nothing. These boxers have nowhere to hide. If their own fan base who supports them, demanding them to do something that they automatically should do and should not be asked to do, there'll be no ducking. It'll hard to get away with robberies and go on with your career. And it'll be hard to say you're this and it'll be hard to say you're that, because we're holding everybody to the same standard. We can't control what they do behind the screen, behind the scenes, on the score. We can't control that, but we can control as boxing fans what we want to see and what we expect from these boxers. And if you can't do it, then we flat out shouldn't support it. But as long as fanboys still exist, corruption, cheating, PEDs, scorecard manipulations will always exist. So you need to forget about that old school era where the best fought the best, because it ain't never coming back. I'm out.